Have you ever lost your cool with your kids, vowed you'd never do that again, only to find yourself yelling at them an hour later or a few days later? Yeah, that's happened to me too. How about this? Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night wondering if you're doing the right thing or if you made the right decision for your child or if you just totally screwed up their life? Sounds like me too. Well, I want you to know you are not alone. This is what happens to all good parents. But as a child psychiatrist and mother of two, it's my goal as the parent doctor to help you find some useful answers about how you can prevent these things from happening and have each day be better than the last. After all, we all are striving to have a trusting, connected relationship with our kids, and we all want to launch kids who are ready to be adults in this great big world. Parenting is not just about raising successful kids, it's about raising ourselves, mastering our own emotion regulation, breaking cycles, and creating a home and life filled with love, resilience, and connection. If this resonates with you, please join me in the Empowered Parent Club. Follow, rate, and share this podcast with anyone that you know who would benefit from it. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Parent Doctor podcast, everyone. I'm really delighted today to be welcoming Justin Dove. He is a licensed educational psychologist and the school psychologist where my children go to school. It's a private school here in LA called Merman School. And he is just an amazing human being, as you will hear. His work focuses on social justice, neurodiversity affirming practices, special education advocacy, and mental health. He has worked in public charter, and independent schools in Ohio, Georgia, and California for the last 15 years. We've been lucky to have him at Merman for the last 4 years, where he focuses on the education of gifted students. If he looks familiar to you, you may have seen him on a quiz show on Netflix called The 1% Club. So go check that out if you'd like to. But welcome, Justin. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Caudill. It's my pleasure.
Oh, call me Marissa. But yeah, so I think, Justin, we do just a very casual conversation here on my podcast. And as we were discussing before, as a child psychiatrist, I definitely know for families that how kids are doing in school can be a big stressor for parents. And so I think it'll be a very fruitful conversation if you can kind of help my listeners understand better what happens when you raise concerns to your school psychologist. What's the upside and the downside? Because a lot of families that I work with, as you know as well, don't want their kids' diagnosis like ADHD or autism or dyslexia to be known necessarily at school. They worry about judgment from teachers or being categorized in a negative way or expectations being lower. So tell me a little bit first, like kind of what you do as a school psychologist. What does that look like?
Yes, as a school psychologist, broadly put, I like to frame what we do as we promote the academic, social, emotional, and behavioral health of school communities that we serve. And that obviously is a tall task and it requires a lot of collaboration with other educators, with community-based providers, but really we are most focused on creating systems of support for students in those domains that I listed: academic, social, emotional, behavioral. In some respects, we have been viewed as the gatekeepers to special education, which is not really a term or framing that I promote or that I'm a proponent of, because I think we can do so much more. But oftentimes, a family's first interaction with a school psychologist in traditional public school context will be likely through the special education processes that are outlined in federal law.
Right. And so we were discussing that a little bit too. And I think a lot of parents don't know about this. I mean, even as a child psychiatrist, I had to learn it. So all kids' rights to an education are protected by federal laws, right?
Yes.
And they have the right to learn in the least restrictive environment, meaning if they can be supported to stay in a mainstream classroom, they have the right to that. And special education accommodations come in kind of different levels, right? So can you talk about what those are on the public school level again, and then maybe you can translate it into what you call it at the private school?
Yes, so the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which goes back to the 70s and which was updated in the 2000s, sort of outlines the requirements for public schools, and that is to provide a free and appropriate public education to all students, but specifically those students with disabilities. And so the IEP is that document that sort of details the legal requirements for an individual child. It lists the disability under which they are classified. And there are generally 12 or 13 categories under which a child can be identified, and that varies from state to state. And so, having worked in Ohio, Georgia, and California, there were some differences in classifications. And that can sometimes lead to some confusion because, on the clinical side, as you know, the DSM and things of that nature have a great deal of classifications, but
Hmm.
oftentimes, if a child does qualify for services in a public school setting, you have to find one of those neat categorical boxes
Yep.
that best describes their needs. And so I frame it as once your foot is in the door, so once a comprehensive evaluation has been completed and there's a process through which you have to request and go through that, you are then entitled to an IEP where your needs drive the services as opposed to your classification, which is to say that two students with, let's say they're classified under the category of autism, they shouldn't have the exact same IEP because naturally they are different students. There will likely be some commonalities because of their classifying condition. But this student may have social needs that are different. This student may have academic needs. And so that's where the individualization comes into play through
Yeah.
that IEP, that Individualized Education Program document that all students with disabilities are entitled to.
Right. So basically, if a parent were concerned about their child, and usually the schools only initiate an IEP process if a child is falling significantly behind. And it's often, therefore, especially for younger kids, the parents who initiate this process, in my experience at least. Because in order to qualify for an IEP, a child usually has to be 2 academic years behind in their academic performance. Is that correct? Or at least have concerns that they might fall behind. So at least what I know is I work with a lot of families who have kids before like 3rd grade where the child's struggling in some way with like
Yes.
reading or behaviors or other things like that. And it can be difficult for those families to get the school to agree to initiate that IEP process. So what do you recommend in those cases?
Yeah,
I don't
so
know if you have
what you
experience with
describe,
that, but
yeah, what you describe is unfortunately termed the wait to fail approach to special education, which is to say that we're looking for this gap, this measurable gap that is 1 to 2 years, particularly as it relates to learning disabilities. I find that that approach is both legally indefensible as well as antiquated, and it's not in the
mm-hmm.
best interest of children. And so, what I would encourage families the moment that they have a concern about how their child is doing, again, academically, social emotionally, behaviorally, because some districts will sort of narrow that conversation to just, well, how are they doing academically? Whereas, and that's oftentimes where a lot of our twice exceptional kids, kids who are gifted and have a disability, sort of slip through the cracks because they may
Mm-hmm.
seemingly, particularly on standardized measures, be doing, at grade level, above grade level. And so the question is, well, why do they need any support? The academics are fine. But a lot of times it's those other areas where they have a need. And so for those families who identify a need. Hopefully, their student's teacher has come to them proactively and said, "Hey, let's work together. I'm noticing some differences." But if not, I would encourage them first to make contact with the classroom teacher because that's the person that's going to have the most day-to-day contact with their child. And you'll want to ask very specific questions, such as, "What does the student support process look like at insert the name of this school?" Because
Mm-hmm.
there should be a process where you can engage in collaborative problem solving conversations that can be initiated by the family, that can be initiated by teachers or other administrators, such as a school psychologist or whomever, to address problems. Now, one caveat to this is sometimes that process is used as a way to unnecessarily and inappropriately stall an evaluation because
Mm-hmm.
they're saying, well, we see this evidence of autism in your child. We see this evidence of ADHD, but they need 6 to 9 weeks of intervention first. The law is very clear, and there, the documents that I'm happy to share with anyone who may want them. That intervention process can happen during the evaluation period if that's deemed necessary. So if a family is open to, okay, we're kind of early in this process. Let's give it the 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 9 weeks, whatever. Let's monitor progress. Let's look at data, and then we'll make a decision. If they're fine with that, then certainly. But hold the school accountable for sharing that data with you. But if the concerns that you've noticed and the feedback that you've gotten from, let's say, pediatrician or other, family members says that we believe that this student is going to need some individualized supports right now, then you can demand that evaluation at once. But
Mhm.
that request needs to be placed in writing. And
Yeah.
oftentimes districts will be much more responsive to that if you use certain language that lets them know that you know your rights.
I love what you just said. So that was gold. For those of you who are listening, Justin said, if a teacher comes to you with the concerns about your child's behavior or their social development or their academics, but usually more commonly when it's a problem, I think to get the evaluation, it's the behavior or the social development piece. I feel like with academic delays, the school resists, well, in general, what I have seen is that there's less resistance from the school to do a formal IEP
Typically.
evaluation. But with behaviors or social development issues, it's easy, I think, as a parent to feel upset, kind of caught off guard, defensive,
Yes.
hurt, offended when a teacher is telling you that your child's having some struggle socially or with behaviors in the classroom. I think it's really important for parents to kind of stay calm, to recognize that even though it may feel like you're being attacked or your child's being attacked, this is actually most likely a very caring person who's dedicated their life to kids and their development and education, who's raising a concern because they want to help your kid and you. And so
Yes.
to respond with that language that you just said, what is the student success plan for the school? Like, what's the process that we go through? Thank you for raising this concern about, little Susie or little Johnny.
Yeah.
I hear you, and I would like to learn more about the student success process and plan that the school has in place when this comes up. And then, yeah, I think what you also said is very important, and I've talked to many families about this as well. If you feel that the school isn't taking your concerns seriously, or if you feel like there is resistance or delay, it is important to know that any parent has the right to request in writing that their child be evaluated for qualifying for an individualized educational plan. And it would be helpful to work with a therapist or a psychiatrist or a pediatrician in drafting that document, or even an educational advocate so that you know the language to utilize. But you can make that request in writing. And then once you do, the school has a certain number of days in which your child is attending school to complete that assessment. And you're right, that can happen even if they say, let's start with a student success team, SST. That's usually kind of a parent teacher agreement about something they're going to try. Like maybe they're going to move your kid to the front of the classroom if they're having trouble staying focused, or they're going to give your kid a bouncy ball chair to sit on so that they can get their wiggles out or something. That would be an SST type of intervention. It's fine to start that. But if you are also not wanting to waste any time and you want to hit the ground running with a further evaluation and get to the bottom of things, then making the request for an individualized educational plan evaluation would be appropriate, I think.
Yes, all of that is very true. And again, we want to give school teams, and I like that you highlighted, educators are those who have dedicated themselves to the betterment of children. And so I think sometimes the conversation around advocacy can become very conflictual
Mm-hmm.
and very adversarial, which
Yeah.
I don't necessarily like to start it from that standpoint, particularly when you haven't had that contact with the school yet. Now, granted, there are many families out there who have other stories about maybe the resistance or the lack of concern that they have sensed from school teams, and that's a different conversation entirely. But if you are just initiating the conversation, let's try to give the school team that benefit of the doubt, and they want to collaborate with you. They want to work together to promote your child's success, and hopefully that's the experience that the majority of our families will have when they raise those concerns, when they ask those questions of the educators that are charged with the care of their children.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, within our parent supporting parents, Justin, you're always talking about assuming positive intent. I think that goes a long way when you're a parent talking with your child's educators and school professionals. Assuming positive intent is going to help it be a much smoother process. And I think often we feel like we have to put up our dukes and fight. And hopefully that's not the case, right? I mean, it does require you to be consistent. There is that kind of squeaky wheel gets the grease. You just want to be
Yes.
reminding people that you're there and that your child's there and that you just want to be on it and how are things
Yeah.
going and checking in. But I think you're absolutely right. I didn't mean to indicate that people should go to an educational advocate the minute they have a concern. But if you make a request and there's still delays or if it's not taken seriously, then sometimes you do have to go that route. And again, that's not to
Oh,
say anything negative about my sister is actually a educator as well. She's a guidance
Uh,
counselor for the middle school that we both attended. It's a public middle school in New
oh, very
Hampshire.
cool.
So we basically do the
Yes.
same thing with different degrees.
Yes, yes.
But it is so challenging. I mean, our public schools are tasked with Herculean, responsibility to try to take care of
Yes.
all of these kids. And in rural areas like New Hampshire, it's even more challenging, right? Because they don't have the population and the tax basis to really offer optimal everything for the kids who need it. So they're kind of,
Yes.
MacGyvering it and trying to do everything they can on a low budget with few people.
Are you a parent who wants to read all the parenting books and you have maybe a growing list or stack on your nightstand, but somehow you just never seem to find the time to get to them? If so, I totally relate to you and I want you to know I'm here to help. Every month on the third Wednesday, I read, summarize, and present a parenting book that I have chosen that I think is a great one. And I do this via Zoom. If you'd like to get into the Empowered Parent Book Club, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. This is totally free. It's a public service that I provide. And everyone who signs up gets access not just to the replay in case they can't make it to the live Zoom, but also to an actionable PDF that I create custom for each book that we read. So I would love to have you. This is a growing community now of over 200 members. These are like-minded, engaged, energized, supported parents who want to be more empowered for the sake of their kids. If you'd like to join us, again, please go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. See you there.
So just kind of keep that in mind. And, different states do better jobs than other states too. So I think keeping in mind that, again, assuming positive intent, understanding that everybody's doing the best they can with the resources available. And yes, there is legally like a deadline by which an evaluation is supposed to be done from the time you submit a request in writing. But the reality is there aren't enough school psychologists to do all this neuropsych testing for kids, and the demands on them are huge. I mean, in LAUSD especially, it's just kind of, I know,
Definitely.
talking to some of the psychologists who work there, it's wild.
Definitely.
So everybody's doing the best they can. And I think we have to assume that everybody does want what's best for kids. And sometimes it just takes trial and error, which takes time, and that's frustrating too, because of course, as a parent, you want things to turn around when they're not going well or when your child is struggling as quickly as possible. But as you were saying, the whole thing about kids is they're individuals. And so figuring out what works for any individual kid is going to be a process. There's not some magical like, oh, your kid has ADHD, we'll do this and it'll be all better in a month. Like, that's just not how it works.
Yeah, yeah. And there are certainly where I think, diagnoses are most helpful is that they do give you some clarity as it relates to, okay, these are the interventions that are evidence-based, research-based. This is the community of families and other children that can maybe lead me to feel a greater sense of belonging. This is sort of the why behind some of the differences, but again, your child is still an individual. And so there's a saying, if you've met two kids with autism, you've met two kids with autism. Naturally, to receive a diagnosis of autism, as an example, there are going to be certain commonalities in social communication and behavior and things of that nature. But how that manifests and the support and accessibility needs that two students have will be a very individualized conversation that requires a great deal of thought and care.
Can you speak a little bit to the differences between the process that one goes through in a public school? We just discussed that, right? Like, you could make a request for an individualized educational plan. Whether you could make a request to see if your child qualifies for an IEP.
Yes. Yes.
And then what if your child is enrolled in a private school, but you have concerns about something like autism or dyslexia? How does one go about that evaluation process? Do you have to pay a private psychologist to do that evaluation? Can you utilize public school resources for that?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and it's a process that I've attempted to help a lot of families at the school that I serve navigate, because some of this information is not necessarily readily known. Whereas IDEA, which I spoke on earlier, guides public schools as far as giving them the parameters of, okay, how do you identify the students with disabilities, child find, that's that aspect of the law. How do you provide those services through IEPs and provide FAPE? Private or independent schools have a lot more latitude to say these are the things we can or cannot do. And so while there is Title III of ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that does say that private schools are required to provide reasonable accommodations, but there are a lot of sort of stipulations to that and caveats to that, such as you have to be able to meet the standard of that private school. So, for instance, there are private schools out there that are oriented toward high academic achievement. So their admissions process may require some testing of some sort, some screening to see if you meet the threshold for them. You would be allowed accommodations that don't change the standard. So if your child is not meeting their thresholds for academic performance, then that private school could legally say, we can't meet the needs of your student. Hopefully, they would help you find a better setting. But in the case of the school that I serve, we are a school oriented around gifted education. And so that standard is giftedness. And so our admissions department can say, these are the minimum requirements that you have to meet. Now, once they are enrolled, then it is our responsibility to provide reasonable accommodations. And reasonable can relate to cost, it can relate to the resources that are, the human power that's needed to provide a particular accommodation. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is making sure that when our students are admitted into the school, that we do everything in our power to meet their needs because they've been proven to be gifted, but that does not preclude them from also being twice exceptional, which is to say they are gifted and autistic, gifted and they have ADHD, gifted and dyslexic. And we are increasingly seeing more students who fit that profile as we expand as a school. And so I really want to make sure that we do everything in our power, knowing that there are limits to what we can do before we reach the conclusion that a student would be better served elsewhere. And so to those families in independent or private schools, you can ask the school counselor. A lot of times they won't necessarily have a school psychologist in independent or private schools, but increasingly some of our private schools are turning to school psychologists. But more often than not, there will be a school counselor, there will be learning specialists, there will be some form of a support team. And so you can go to them with the same questions. Hey, these are the concerns that I have. What are the student support processes? What are the student success processes? How can we partner? How can we collaborate to address these needs and help my child be more successful here?
Yeah. I think it's really confusing for parents to know where to go. Like, say you have a child and the teacher's expressing concern that they're struggling to pay attention or having poor body boundaries, kind of things that might be symptoms of ADHD, might also be normal
Yes.
child development.
Right.
And so then, like, I would think it's hard for me to imagine not being a child psychiatrist and not knowing what I know. But if I didn't know any of these things, I would think, okay, what am I supposed to do? Like, go to my pediatrician, like, then the pediatricians do diagnose and treat most ADHD in this country. So they're probably going to give you some forms that your teachers will fill out, your kids' teachers that you will fill out. And then they can review those forms with you and say, yeah, it seems like based on what you and the teachers and so, like the karate teacher are saying,
Yes.
seems consistent that little Johnny is having symptoms that might be ADHD. But from there, then you have to come back to the school and decide, like, what does that mean? And this is where we were discussing, and you know that this is true in your experience, like, I think many times parents are afraid to tell the school that they got confirmation of a diagnosis like ADHD
Yes.
or autism because they don't want their kid to be marginalized. I think oftentimes, especially if a child is, functioning reasonably well academically, or the parent feels strongly that they could, with a little more support, stay in the mainstream classroom, there can be fear that their child will be put in a special education classroom and therefore separated from friends. And I feel like this has generally been a trend over the last 20 years, that kids are kept together as much as possible, more so than they were when I was a student. There's value in keeping different types of learners in the same classroom together so that we can appreciate that everybody has different strengths. And just because someone might have ADHD doesn't mean that they're not brilliant in other ways and that they don't add value to a team in ways that people without ADHD don't add value. So I don't know where I'm going with this. I guess I'm just saying, like, it's confusing for parents to know where to go. I think they should view the school psychologists or school counselors as a safe place. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, because even if you just talk about it, it's not necessarily going to get the ball rolling to put your child into a special education setting unless you want that, right?
Yeah, I like to look at special education as not a place, but an array or menu of service options. And so to your point about what it used to look like where kids were warehoused and isolated, okay, that's the special education class. That's the special education building. Increasingly, schools are moving away from that approach because it's not in the best interest of children. The research does not really support that.
Mhm.
But we do want to find those meaningful moments where a student may need something a little different. So for a dyslexic student, that may mean that they go to a more intensive space where reading intervention can be provided. But for the other aspects of their day, you would not notice much of a difference. And so that's why you have to have that very individualized conversation. But I would like to backtrack to your last question because I would just like to highlight the fact that even for private school families, independent school, what we call parentally placed private school students, public schools still have a requirement to do an evaluation. And so for the families that I, support at the school that I support or serve, if there's a disability suspected, obviously you can go to the local clinical psychologist, neuropsychologist, and have that testing done for a private school family. Oftentimes that's quite pricey. And
Mhm.
so even though we typically look at families in independent schools as maybe being of means and things of that nature, not all of them can just fund an evaluation for 7,000, 10,000. I've seen prices as high as $14,000 for
Wow.
that very specialized work. So you can request from your resident public school district an evaluation to identify if there's a disability. And oftentimes, that information that they would provide would be adequate to for that private school to provide accommodations. Now, the services that that public school might offer will be contingent upon you returning to their district. But the accommodations, the instructional findings, the recommendations, if you wish to remain in that private school, they can review that information and create a plan that makes sense in that setting.
Yeah, so that's a really great point. Thank you for bringing that up. So again, like if you think your child may have autism or ADHD or significant anxiety or dyslexia or some other learning difference, you may start with the pediatrician. Usually insurance though, medical insurance is not going to
Yeah.
pay for something that's not, they consider education not medical, which is weird, but
We
this
need
is
to
how
change
it is.
that.
I know. But like if you ask your insurance company to pay your local neuropsychologist their $7,000, $10,000 fee for their multiple days of testing, you're not going to get it. So the point that Justin's making is a really important one for families to know, that you do have the right to use your taxpayer dollars and your public school
Yes.
system to which you would be enrolled if your child went there, even if your child is enrolled in a private school, to request in writing that evaluation to see if your child qualifies for an IEP. And so that process then gets initiated. And I'm going to have a neuropsychologist on pretty soon, Dr. Karen Miller, to kind of discuss what is that testing. But just so parents know, they do achievement testing in the public schools. I don't think they do IQ testing anymore, at least not in California. Do you know differently? That was
So
what I
that is
was.
a very district specific. LAUSD has very unique practices due
Yeah.
to some laws that limit IQ testing with certain populations of students, but typically intelligence and psychological processing is a part of a comprehensive evaluation for special education
Yeah.
services.
And then they would also do some screening for mental health problems as well. If autism is a concern, they would do something called the ADOS, which is a diagnostic scale for autism. So it's a pretty thorough workup. Now you may be asking, what's the question between that and the $12,000, $14,000 workup that the psychologist would give? It's probably a more broad test potentially. They might cover all the bases if you do a $14,000 workup, and they might stay more focused otherwise at the school setting. But as Justin is saying, they will give you a report kind of outlining what their findings are and what the reasonable accommodations would be. If your child is in a private school, they're not going to send like a speech language pathologist to the private school for your child from the public education domain, but you'll have that document that you can then bring to your private school and decide what the needs are. But it is such an overlapping Venn diagram, I feel, between the schools, the insurance, and then for families that have their kids in private schools, it's that third circle as well to try to figure out like where are the services going to come from. And for children who are on the autism spectrum, if you're in a state like California that has a lot of services for minor children, there's that piece as well. So it's a lot to navigate. It's a lot for families to navigate. But I think the take home should be your school counselor, your school psychologist is most likely a friendly, ally, and that's where you should start, and assume positive intent and know that you can have a lot of open conversation there to discuss all of these things without feeling worried that it's going to put your child in a box or put them down a path that you don't want. I mean, it's always something that can be changed, and really it has to change because kids are so dynamic. They change so much year over year. It's incredible.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, and so your counselor, your school psychologist is a great place to start. We talked a little bit about advocates, special education advocates, educational advocates a little earlier. I'm certainly not against what they do, and I think in many cases, when you start to sense that maybe uh, the priorities are not aligned between perhaps a family and a school team, when you start to get maybe feel some frustration about some miscommunications, or things are getting lost in translation, or just the nebulous nature of these different legal mandates that guide these things. An advocate can be helpful, because I wouldn't go into court without a lawyer, someone who sort of understands how to navigate that. And while school teams are oriented toward helping and supporting and collaborating, unfortunately, sometimes districts are centered around the minimum, meeting their legal minimum, because of how, as you said, gargantuan of a task they are charged with.
Well, and
But
their
that doesn't
budgetary
absolve them,
restraints. Yeah.
and budgetary restraints. But that doesn't absolve them from doing everything in their power to meet the unique needs of a family's child, because that's who you are centering your focus on, and that's where an advocate can perhaps help you get more than perhaps would be offered um, initially.
Yeah.
And so advocates can be very helpful.
Yeah. So advocates are basically lawyers whose specialty is this idea law and understanding its implementations, for people who may not know that term. And I guess as a child psychiatrist, again, I have to always keep in mind that my view of things is a bit extreme, because I always work with the families who have kids who are really struggling in different ways, whose needs may be really exceptional, kids who might need residential school on the taxpayer dollar for a mental health condition, for example. And oftentimes families do ultimately need to get an advocate, because it becomes this tug of war between the health insurance covering their severe depression or anxiety that's preventing them from functioning at school. And when that's done everything it can and the kids still can't make it back to school in their traditional local school, then sometimes that next step does need to be taken, and that usually doesn't happen without an advocate. But that's a different ball of wax.
Those are very unique situations. Yeah.
Rare situations and more unique situations. But I guess the message that I want to give to parents is just to kind of trust your gut, know that what you think is going on with your child is important and valuable. Your spidey sense about what they need is something that their teachers should want to hear, and have an open mind also about their teacher's spidey sense and their counselor's thoughts about what their kids need and what might benefit them. And just be willing to try things. I think also the way we talk to our kids about any differences that they have is so important. And I think Merman does such a great job about this. So my kids are both at the school that Justin is the school counselor at, as I said, the school psychologist. And I have to tell you, so during the fires earlier this year, my daughter, who's in second grade, you were leading some social emotional stuff with them on the Zoom when they were in Zoom school. And she said to me, like, Mom, I don't need this. I have two parents who are psychiatrists.
She's like, lucky.
I know. She's like, they're just talking about feelings, and I know how to talk about feelings. I'm like, oh my goodness, Emily, you're so.
She's like, I can lead this class.
I know. So yeah, but I think it's so important, and it's so wonderful that has become so much more mainstream. I mean, I just don't remember back in the 70s and 80s. I'm aging myself, but like, I don't remember any education that focused on my social or emotional development. I don't know if you.
Nor do I in the 90s and 2000s.
I know, but it's so important.
Yeah.
And I think
extremely
your point about, academics, behavior is just a manifestation of brain development, really, and like coping skills. And then social emotional, which is something kids can learn, their ability to express their feelings safely. And all of that is stuff that's under development, under construction throughout adolescence. I mean, basically throughout an entire educational experience from K to 12, your kid's brain is under remodeling, especially from like early adolescence all the way through high school.
Yes.
So yeah, these things are challenging, but the good news is we have school psychologists who are there to help us, and we have laws that are there to protect our kids and support us as parents to advocate for what our kids need. Let's see, anything else that we didn't cover that you think would be helpful for parents to know?
I think we've covered sort of the framework for, identifying needs, collaboratively problem solving with school teams and things of that nature. Um, as far as how we frame differences to our kids, I think that's a really important piece as well. So I just like to highlight the work of Dr. Liz Angoff. If you're not familiar with her, to the listeners out there, she has sort of conversational scripts, if you will, to discuss forms of neurodivergence, whether it's ADHD, autism, dyslexia. How do you introduce something like that to your child in a way that is affirming, that is accurate, that is going to give them a better sense of themselves and make them more successful in their advocacy that they'll increasingly need to do in spaces as they get older? So often parents are hesitant to share these diagnoses because of the stigma that
Yeah,
is oftentimes associated with them. But I think if we can challenge that stigma, and that's really what the neurodiversity movement is doing. Challenge that stigma. Differences are not synonymous with deficiencies. Differences are differences that we should accommodate for, understand, celebrate. Um, and our society, our world is going to be better because of that variance in how people
absolutely.
approach things, how people approach problems, how people ideate, how their brains work. I think that's what makes this life, this world beautiful. So we need to stop stigmatizing. We need to understand and we need to adapt the environments to better meet everyone's needs, not just those who fit in to sort of the middle of the of the bell curve.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable as a point. And I think to call it even like idea and to have that disability word, and then for the students that I've worked with who've been in high school and then they go to college, and I have to help them recognize that going to the student disability office is something that they should do from day one so that they have those accommodations there if they need them. Hopefully they won't need them, but like if they have ADHD and they've had extra time on exams throughout high school, maybe they think they won't need it in college. But if it's to their benefit to be able to like sit in a quiet place and take a test with a little extra
There's no
time,
shame. There's
then
no
they
shame in
should, but
that.
it's so hard to get a 17, 18, 19-year-old to believe that, Justin. It's so
Yeah.
hard. But I totally agree. And I think I'm really thankful actually that there's a lot more people now on YouTube, on TikTok, like talking about ADHD. ADHD is kind of a superpower in many ways. Like so many CEOs have ADHD. Like it's a really unique way that the brain can work to be very creative and visionary. But when we call it a disability, then it gets parents to think, and sometimes teachers too, from a young age, that this kid is like defective in some way, or they have a problem that needs to be solved. And
Yeah.
really, we need to be busting through that old belief and recognizing that just some kids are not meant to sit for 8 hours a day in a classroom.
I would say
that
most
shouldn't be
children are not meant
I
for
know, and
that.
that shouldn't be surprising to us. Like, how should that be surprising? Yeah, I mean, as you know, I do a book club every month, and so one of the ones that I did this year was with Ned Johnson and Bill. Oh, what's his name? Stixrud, I think is his name. He's an educational psychologist. Bill Stixrud, and Ned Johnson's like a coach for kids with ADHD and things like that.
Yes.
But they quote all these stats about how little recess kids get now, how some schools have no downtime for the kids. I mean,
Yeah.
we really as parents have to do a better job of stepping up and helping our educational system move from this pressure that's on them about test scores to realizing that like kids are kids and they need time to play and they need time to just be free. And that is absolutely that social emotional part and the behavior part, which are really 2/3 of all the things they're supposed to be learning at school.
Yes.
Like they learn that mostly when they're just left to themselves to like figure things out.
Yeah, play is the work of children.
It is.
You know, that is where they learn so much informally.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me. I will put those resources that you gave us about the IDEA Act and the other resources. We can put those in the show notes for people. And if anybody has any questions, would it be okay if we share your contact information as well and folks could reach out to you, Justin?
Yes, please. I'm happy to share templates for making those requests to school
Nice.
districts. One of the things I also do through my private company, which is called Peace Ed, is advocacy services for families to help navigate the special education process, knowing how to put your request in writing, being
Perfect.
present for IEP meetings. And so I'm happy to share any and all resources as it relates to getting the most for your child.
Okay, great. And I'll put that Peace Ed for Success website in our show notes as well, so folks can find you there. Do you work only with families in California or nationwide?
I can work with families nationwide as it relates to special education advocacy for coaching services for things of that nature.
Perfect. That's an amazing resource. All right. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Justin.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.